Hey everyone, this is Teresa from Base 10 Montessori, and today I want to make a little bit of a different video. Some of you might remember that a year ago I did a video all about the carnivore diet. A couple years ago I started on a keto diet and then I switched to carnivore and I lost about 100 pounds. So I did really well with the weight loss aspect of it, but in my interview with Dave Mack last year, we discussed a lot of things, and one of those things was that I was still struggling with my thyroid and I was struggling a lot with my cholesterol numbers. Now, a lot of people on carnivore diet just say, oh, cholesterol, it doesn't matter. However, my cholesterol was quite bad across the board. Like my triglycerides were bad and my HDL was quite low. So I had high triglycerides and I had low HDL. So I went to do a calcium score and that came back 0. So we do know that my cholesterol may not be indicative of heart disease. So we decided to just focus on my thyroid and see if we could fix what was going on there and see if that improved my cholesterol. So I just wanted to give everybody a little bit of updates as far as what's working for me, maybe what isn't working for me, and what I've discovered with my blood work since last year. Now, that being said, I tried some different things throughout the year and some things worked well, some things didn't work well. So the first thing we did was to approach my thyroid. So my doctor knows that I'm not really big on taking prescription medication. So I decided not to go down the route of thyroid medication. Instead, what we tried was a high dose iodine based on Dr. Brownstein's methodology for treating thyroid issues. So we went on this high dose iodine journey and I worked my way up to this higher dose. And then we got my blood work back and my thyroid did not improve. It got a little bit worse. So we decided to stop doing that. So I worked my way back down to just a regular daily dose of iodine, just a normal dose. So we tried that. The other thing that I tried a year ago that I incorporated into my diet was a little bit of organ meats, and I don't like organ meats. So I did a supplement called Pluck. I just sprinkle it on my food. I don't do too much of it. I don't like organ meats, so I don't like the taste of it. So I just sprinkle a little bit on, and I do feel like that helped. That helps me get a little bit more energy. So I feel like that was a good choice, but I know that that is actually a really controversial subject for carnivores because I think it was Nutrition with Judy that came out with a video about organ meats and how it's not the superfood, but I do feel like it helps me a little bit. So just check with your doctor on those things and see if, first of all, if taking organ meats would cause any type of toxicity in your diet, or if for some reason you feel like you don't have all your nutrients, get some lab work done first, take some blood work, talk to your doctor before you add anything like that to your diet. Because if you eat too much organ meat, you can have a vitamin toxicity. So it's very important to talk all these things through and make sure you know what your body needs before you take a supplement. So just that being said, I'm not giving medical advice today. I'm just sharing my journey, my story, and what's helped me. So between March of last year of 2024 and November of 2024, nothing improved. I got my lab work back and my cholesterol really didn't improve very much and my thyroid didn't improve at all. In fact, it got a little bit worse. And this led me to worry that maybe the carnivore diet isn't good for the thyroid. I know there is a lot of controversy out there. There are a lot of doctors out there who say that carnivore will cause your thyroid to get worse. Now, I already had a bad thyroid before I started carnivore, and while my lab work wasn't showing that I was improving, my symptoms felt better. And so you have to kind of reconcile that with what's going on with your body, right? Okay, so my lab work's not great, but my symptoms are better, that I feel better with this diet than I did before. And just a note for some of you who have been following me, you might remember that I used to be a raw vegan. So I've come from the raw vegan to the carnivore diet in the last 10 years. So I've made quite the journey trying to figure out what foods will help my thyroid, what foods will help me balance hormones. And so that is a huge topic for women, particularly women of a certain age, right? So I've really tried to do an N=1 experiment on my body to find out what works for me and what doesn't. So I'm not coming at this as any dogmatic approach. I really want to come at my diet from a scientific approach. And I don't want to shame anybody who does vegan diets or who does a carnivore diet. You know, I don't want anybody to feel like they have to have a certain diet to succeed. You need to be your own scientist with your diet and figure out what's best for you. So with that being said, I was a little disappointed in my blood work in November, but I still wasn't at the point that I wanted to take any medication for anything. So I decided to give it another 6 months. So over the last 6 months, I did change a few things about my lifestyle. The first thing I did based on my doctor's recommendation was do the red light or infrared light therapy. So I invested in a few infrared light bulbs, and I do think that that helps. It at least makes me feel better. I at least enjoy the experience. I got one of those heat lamps with the infrared light, and I find that to be very therapeutic. So I tried that. So that's something new I tried. This winter, I was also on some ivermectin for a little bit. So I did take ivermectin over the winter. And I have personal reasons for that, and feel free to comment down below. I had some things going on in my family, and I felt like that was just a good choice for my family, was to be on that for just for personal reasons. And that was something, again, I went through my doctor. I talked to my doctor about. It's not something I just made a decision on for myself without any medical reference first. So I did take ivermectin during the winter, as well as adding some infrared light therapy. And then it was time to schedule my blood work again, and I was still feeling like, you know what, I don't feel like anything's improved. There's one last thing I can do. There's one more thing I'm going to try and do before I get this blood work. And it was my Hail Mary pass to get good blood work, and it was the one thing I did not want to give up since being on the carnivore diet, and that was coffee. I did not want to give up coffee, but I thought about 2 weeks before my blood work, I thought, you know what, I'm going to do something extreme and stop drinking coffee. So I did that. And instead of coffee, I did allow myself to have a cup of black English tea. So that is what I drink in the mornings instead of coffee about 2 weeks before my blood work. So with that being said, I want to share with you what my blood work results were, and then we can talk a little bit more about what may have affected it, what may have changed, and what is my mindset going forward. Okay, so first of all, let's talk about the LDLP. Now, if you've watched my interview with Dave Mack, and I'll link that interview down in the comment section below, and I should have a follow-up interview coming up in the next week, hopefully. I was actually supposed to have an interview with Dave Mack already, but we keep postponing it and playing email tag. So that's still coming up. Hopefully next week I'll have that recorded with him. But for right now, let's talk about the LDLP, because in last year's video with Dave Mack, I talked about how my LDLP score was so high they didn't even give me a number for my cholesterol. Like, it says it's just somewhere above 3,500, 3,500. They didn't give me a number. They just said it's above that. And I thought, oh, dang, should I be on the carnivore diet if my LDLP is so high they can't give me a number, right? So that was a little bit of a scary response. I wasn't quite sure what to make of that. So I've had to do a lot of research on that. But I decided to stick with carnivore, see this through, see what happens a year later. And so now I have the current results. So it's still not great. I'll warn you, the LDLP score is not great. However, I now have a number. It's low enough to have a number. So the score I have right now is 2,401. So I've had at least like 1,100 point drop in my LDLP. Now, that's just the LDLP. Let's talk about the LDLC for a second. So the LDLC, let me take a look. It was 391, and now it's 264. So it's dropped quite a bit, but it's still a little bit high, right? That's not great. But let's talk about triglycerides real quick, because that's the one that my doctor was worried about. That's the one that made him say, you know, we need to get a calcium score. We need to look at this further. So let's talk about triglycerides. I was on my last blood work in March of last year, I was at 157. As of today, my triglycerides are 96. So I am now in the normal range for triglycerides. So I improved a lot. I went from 157 to 96. So that's a great improvement right there. So now let's talk about my HDL, because I have always always had difficulty getting my HDL to go up. And in fact, when I was a raw vegan, it was, I have the notes here, hold on just a second. My HDL in 2013 was 39. That's about the time when I was a raw vegan, and I really, really could not get that HDL up. So I started adding fish into my diet, and it didn't improve very much. So I've always struggled with that. So today, my HDL results is 78. In March of last year, it was 47. So that improved by about 30 points. So my triglycerides dropped into the normal range and my HDL went up. So those are all good things. So I've made it into the normal category for some things on my cholesterol a year later. And let's do one more test result. Let's talk about the small LDLP. I went from 1,228 last year to 191. So that was a huge improvement as well. So as you can see across the board, I've really made a huge improvement in my cholesterol. It's all of a sudden just started to drop and my HDL improve. And I don't really know why. Could it be all coffee? Could coffee really be triggering it that much? Maybe. I don't know. Could it be that it took a year for the carnivore diet to work and really help me out? Possibly, right? Maybe I just needed a year. Maybe it was the infrared light therapy. I don't know. Maybe ivermectin helped me in some way, shape, or form. I don't know. So these are all open-ended questions I have, and I don't really know what it is that was triggering this drop, but I'm glad that it has dropped, and I'm just going to have to keep an eye on it. And we will see in another 8 weeks. I should have another blood test because they did find one other issue with my blood work that they hadn't detected before, and that is lipoprotein little a. This is something I didn't know anything about, but my doctor decided to go ahead and test for it. So he tested for it, and it did turn out that I have a high lipoprotein little a. And what this does is it really does increase your chances for stroke and heart attacks. So it's a genetic thing that, diet and exercise can't really affect too much. And so when I went to do the research on this, um, obviously a lot of the people that speak on that are very much against keto and carnivore. They just don't think it's a very heart healthy diet. And when you have an increased risk of stroke and heart attack because of this lipoprotein little a, they discourage you from being on it. However, I did look at a lot of research, and Nick Norowitz has been doing some great work covering this. So I would recommend you going over to his channel and taking a look at what he has to say, because he's done a fabulous job covering this topic from a keto and carnivore perspective. And after looking at some of the research out there, looking at some of the keto and carnivore research out there, I've decided that carnivore is still my favorite diet for dealing with this issue. And in fact, it has been shown to have some progress when you do the carnivore diet or a keto diet with lipoprotein little a. So looking at that, I've decided I'm not going to change my diet to deal with this, but my doctor did put me on very high dose of vitamin C and lysine. So those are the supplements I'm taking to deal with the lipoprotein little a. Now, there's one last thing I want to cover. There's one last thing I want to talk about, because in the carnivore community, like I mentioned before, there are a lot of doctors outside of the carnivore community that say keto and carnivore are going to kill your thyroid. And so far, my thyroid hasn't been doing that great. I haven't been improving very much. So let's talk about that really quickly. Let's talk about March of last year. My TSH score was 10.7, and then I went on that high dose iodine supplement. And in November of last year, my TSH was 14.1. So as you can see, that was not a good jump. So I stopped doing the high dose iodine. And then on this blood work that I had done in June, my TSH was 10.4. So there was, again, some improvement. It could just be that the high dose iodine was irritating my thyroid, and that may have caused the blood work to change the way it did in November. I'm not sure, but whatever the case, I seem to be improving there. Whether or not I'll improve past this number, that's questionable, right? Maybe now to improve past this number, I may have to go on medication. It's something I need to think about and consider. It's just not something I've been ready to make a decision on yet. So that's the journey of my TSH score for the last year. Now my T3 score from last year to this year has also improved. I went from a 2 last year to 2.4, so I'm back into the normal range. And then the T4 also improved. It went from 0.75 to 0.98. So that was a little improvement there. However, for those of you who follow thyroid numbers, my TPOAB a year ago was 77. In November it was 97. And then this last blood work, it was 101. So my thyroid antibodies are still getting worse. So that is kind of a mixed bag with the thyroid. I don't really know what this means, but again, it gets me back to this question of how much should you depend on your blood work to inform the changes that you're making in your diet? And this is all something that all of us are questioning, right? Whatever diet you are on, you want to look at your blood work and say, okay, but I feel better on this diet. All my symptoms that I was dealing with have improved or gone away. So is it worth the trade-off for some blood work to be a little bit worse? Or do we have to look at our blood work differently? And there are a lot of keto doctors and carnivore doctors out there who will say, you know what? The blood work that we are doing these days is based on a sugar diet. It's based on the standard American diet, right? The SAD diet. And so if we are doing this SAD diet and we are doing blood work based on a SAD diet, will the blood work look differently on somebody who's been doing a very different diet, right? How do we look at blood work through the lens of a different diet? And there are a lot of doctors out there who are going through the testing and going through the markers of what it looks like to have a normal blood test on a carnivore or keto diet. And they have some theories out there. Well, maybe not theories, maybe more a hypothesis. And so it's a really interesting discussion to get into. It's kind of above my pay grade, above my knowledge level to spend a lot of time talking about that. But there are some interesting anomalies in blood work that happens when you change your diet. And so looking at your blood work through the lens of a different diet is actually a very interesting thing to do. And we don't have a lot of conclusions on that yet. There are a lot of hypotheses out there discussing what it means, right? Some people say you can have that lean mass hyperresponder situation where you have no heart disease, no coronary artery disease, none of that stuff, but you have really high LDL, but you're perfectly healthy. So there are a lot of different contexts that we can look at blood work in showing, okay, well, what's the connection here? What is the underlying factor that is causing heart disease? Is it the cholesterol? Is it something else? What are those factors? And then, of course, I want to look at this from a personal level of, well, what am I going to do going forward? For right now, I am continuing to not drink coffee is the first thing. I have not added coffee back into my diet. And you know what? I think I feel better. I think that has helped. And I would not be surprised that that did have a trigger or an impact on my cholesterol results. So I think that might be an improvement. And right now I'm drinking just a little bit of tea, although I'm trying to be careful because I know that tea can affect the thyroid. So again, I just have to be careful with the amount. And that's always difficult for me. I was a coffee addict. I was a sugar addict. And so adding things back into my diet is a difficult decision based on how I know I will respond to adding certain things back into my diet. So that's the first thing. The second thing is I'm pretty happy on my carnivore diet. I'm doing a little more ketovore now because I'm adding some herbs, and lately I've been adding a little bit of green bean, bell pepper, tiny bit of onion, and I just like a little bit of salt and spice to flavor my food. So I do add those things back in, and as I said, I am drinking a little bit of tea instead of coffee. So I am not being a strict carnivore. I'm being a mostly carnivore, right? I am trying to keep my fat ratios at about 75 to 80% fat and the rest protein. And then just a few carbs. I'm usually around 10 carbs for the day. I don't do the carb cycling. I have not done the carb cycling and I don't really want to. But I'll let you know if that changes. My doctor has recommended that for me, but I'm really feeling comfortable with where I am at for my diet. And so I'm adding in a little bit of veggies. I have not really tried fruit at all. Um, and I feel great. I feel good adding a few veggies in. So I have not had any problems with that so far. So with that being said, that's all I have right now for my journey. I know this isn't why most of you come to my channel, so forgive me for doing a video that is not on education. I will be putting out more videos on education and Montessori and Orton Gillingham and all of that stuff all throughout the summer. So I just wanted to make this separate video for this week because I did do that interview last year. I did put a little video on my channel last year, and I did have a lot of people interested in it. So I thought I would make an update. And I will drop you a link to the Dave Mack interview from last year. And when I do my interview with Dave Mack for this year, which hopefully will be sometime next week, I will also link that down below as well. So that's all I have for you today. I hope you liked this video. If you have, please give it a thumbs up, like, share, comment, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in the next video.